Dr. Gary Utz from the Medical Examiner 9th District Office. We continue to look at live pictures of Casey Anthony inside the courtroom. Several of you and several back here at the station have remarked that Casey Anthony, it appears as though that she could become sick hearing some of this testimony. Certainly we can't speculate on that, but just by looking, that's what it would appear from looking at her. Basically, the testimony that we've heard this afternoon revolving all around the remains scene located on December 11th, 2008. Dr. Utz testifying about when he received all of the articles and items along with the remains back at the medical examiner's office on that day, and testifying to what he found and how he examined it, and painstakingly going through those details with the jury. Coming up in just a moment, I'm going to talk about an avenue that we explored yesterday off this topic, but we want to bring it to your attention, of course, and this, of course, goes to Casey Anthony's pen pal. Has been brought back to the Orange County Jail. We were able to exclusively catch up with her mother last night as she went to the Orange County Jail for a video visit. We're going to share some of that interview with you coming up in just a moment. The first thing I want to do, though, is I want to kind of go through the day and what we've heard. Specifically, I want to point out some of the testimony and the cross-examination that we've heard from the defense. Specifically, first, I want to point out Jose Baez and his cross-examination of Steve Hansen, who's the chief examiner, the chief investigator with the medical examiner's office. A lot of what we've heard is the state painstakingly presented how this evidence was found in the woods and the subsequent investigation to that. But I think to hear a lot of what the defense has to say too puts it into a context of how they plan on disputing it when they're able to put on their case. So first, listen into Jose Baez and his cross-examination of the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office Chief Investigator Steve Hansen.
If there is a body or remains that have been tampered with, that would affect everyone's ability to do their job, correct?
Yes.
It would affect investigators to be able to determine what happened at that location?
Yes.
And I apologize, that's Jennifer Welch, who's with the Orange County Sheriff's Office forensic team, not Steve Hansen, obviously. The point that Jose Baez and the defense is trying to make there is they want to start setting the stage to be able to say that the remains were somehow tampered with, that the way that they were found in the woods was not the way that they were originally there. And all of this goes to what it all points at for the defense to use as their additional scapegoat is Roy Kronk, the meter reader who found Caylee Anthony's remains on December 11th of 2008. You notice how the state is putting on their case in sequential order, in chronological order. But notice that they didn't call Roy Kronk, the man who found the remains, they didn't call him to the stand to testify. And it looks as though that they might not call him at all now that they've moved on to the medical examiner and the autopsy photos and moving forward with testimony in that regard. And certainly that could be a prosecutorial tactic in that they're able to clearly lay out their case and not show any evidence of impropriety, when of course the defense, we know, plans on bringing up numerous avenues to explore that Roy Kronk may be to blame in certain areas. One other thing I wanted to talk to you about is about the duct tape that was found at the crime scene. Before lunch, the jurors were shown a certain set of photos. After lunch, they were shown a different set of photos, what has been described by News 13's Jacqueline Fell as more graphic photos. But during the lunch break, I asked Jackie, and I asked her about the duct tape and how it was placed around the skull and what she and possibly the jurors could glean from seeing that. Listen into what she had to say. What's the best way you can describe the juxtaposition of the duct tape in the skull?
It was as if they were just sitting next to each other. It did not look intentional. It did not look as if it had been placed. It was just very loose.
It did not look like it had been wrapped around the skull?
Not at all. The only thing that you could tell around the skull was hair, basically. It was very hard to tell what you were looking at. Again, you would have no idea that were duct tape unless the crime scene investigator pointed it out and then circled it again. It was just sort of loosely placed next to the skull.
And this was prior to anyone touching it. This photo was taken. At
this point, that's what the defense has been asking a number of the crime scene investigators on the stand. And when, you know, in that picture we were just talking about, of them picking up the skull, you can't even see the duct tape. You don't even know where it is.
So from the pictures you saw, would it be easy for the defense to be able to say this duct tape was never wrapped around the skull? From the pictures the jury saw. they would be able to argue that.
From the pictures that we saw, you cannot tell that duct tape had been wrapped around anything.
Now, again, that interview during the lunch hour, so we don't know if that has changed with subsequent photos that have been showed to the jury since lunch. Now, right before these photos began to be shown to the jury, actually, the jury was out of the room at this point, but the judge had a stern admonition for the folks in the gallery who were about to view all of these photos of the crime scene. Listen in to what the judge told everyone in the courtroom before the jury came back in.
For those of you who may have queasiness or uneasiness about viewing these type of photographs where you may have facial reactions or cannot control your emotions, I ask you to leave.
So that is what the judge ordered everyone in the courtroom to do. It doesn't appear to this point that anyone did speak up or gasp or anything like that and have to be removed by any of the court deputies there. Now, when Jennifer Welch, the Orange County forensics examiner, was testifying, and when they were showing, to show you on the air, and it's not, just so you know, this all goes back to the Dale Earnhardt law with autopsy photos and crime scene photos. That's why we were not bringing you these photos on the air. And it wasn't just us not bringing you those photos. The photos weren't being sent out by the pool photographer that is running things inside the courtroom. So they weren't going out at all. So no one outside of the courtroom has seen any of these pictures. What I did was I highlighted a few of the key moments of sound from Jennifer Welch. And then I also edited in Casey Anthony's reaction to that dialogue. Check this out.
Is the skull shown in this photograph?
Yes, it is.
Can you show the members of the jury, if you can circle it, where the skull is? If I may have FR for identification.
Okay, so Casey Anthony's reaction there, and after that point where you saw her look at the screen initially and then look away, ever since these photos have been shown in court, she hasn't looked at the screen. In fact, if you're able to see that shot again when it comes back up, you'll see that Jose Baez has a laptop computer positioned right next to the monitor where those pictures are coming up, so it's out of Casey Anthony's viewpoint, so she wouldn't be able to see it out of her peripheral vision. Now, I also told you that we were going to talk about Casey Anthony's pen pal, who was quietly transferred back to the Orange County Jail on May 11th. We told you initially about this yesterday. What I didn't tell you yesterday is that her mother, her name is Yuchi McDonald, she had a video visit scheduled for last night. We were there, and we had an opportunity to ask her really the top question that's on our mind, and that is, as she is sitting in the Orange County Jail, expecting any day to be called as a state witness, does her mother think that her testimony in this case will get a reduced sentence for her on her 10-year prison term on drug charges? Listen in.
Is she going to be able to get out of jail a little early because of her testimony against Casey Anthony?
Well, that's not our place to say, to judge. It's between God and her, so.
So Robin Adams' mother there, Yuchi McDonald, not sure if that would reduce her prison sentence. We got into that a little bit yesterday with News 13 legal expert David Fussell. Of course, the reason surrounding that is because Robin Adams, in her deposition, told the prosecution and defense that the day after Caylee Anthony's remains were found, that Casey Anthony allegedly told her that the remains were found wrapped in a baby blanket inside of a black plastic bag. What investigators will try to seize on here is that those are investigative details that were not released until much later in the case, and they will try to argue that only the killer or the person who placed the remains there would have been privy to that information. Again, the court on its 15-minute mid-afternoon recess here as we continue to follow all the developments in the murder trial of Casey Anthony. Day 14, we will be back in just moments when the judge and jury returns to the courtroom here in Orlando.
Let's go out to News 13's Adam Longo, who is live outside the Orange County Courthouse. It has been even a little difficult to hear if you cannot see the pictures of the photos that has been described by the prosecution this afternoon.
And Jackie, it's difficult to hear it in context and not see the pictures at the same time. Obviously, there's a very good reason as to why we're not seeing live pictures. These are graphic pictures that the judge has ordered they're to be pixelated and not released until they can be altered by the pool photographer and the pool agency that's running things out of the courtroom. You know, I remarked a moment ago as we were leaving out of our coverage from the mid-afternoon recess that the photographs are not being sent out by the agency, Court TV in session, that's running the pool inside of the courtroom. And so they're not sending out the pictures. It's not a matter of us not putting them on the air. They're literally not being sent out live as we hear things go on in court. What is happening now is they are sending out those photos to us, and we're going to be able to post them on our website here shortly. But the judge, per a court order, has ordered that the key portions of those photos be pixelated. So you're going to be able to see the photo where the skull and the remains and such were found, but the graphic portions of those pictures are going to be pixelated. So again, those are going to be available sometime within the hour on our website, cfnews13.com/Casey. Of course, we're waiting for the court to come back from their recess. Judge Perry said that they would be back at 3:15. Obviously, not at actually 3:10, so here's 6 minutes after that. We're waiting to hear the continuation of the direct examination from Dr. Gary Utz, who's the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office. And what we've seen is kind of the chain of custody, a lot of the evidence that has been released as a result of them finding the remains. Of course, we're hearing about the canvas bag and black bag and duct tape, and the defense taking every opportunity they can to try to discredit where they can the elements that are coming in talking about this case. We look at the live pictures here. We just saw Casey Anthony walk out of the courtroom. So waiting for, of course, the jury to come back in and the lawyers to take up some additional issues. Of course, several people had remarked before the recess that it looked as if Casey Anthony might become sick from hearing all this graphic testimony. We know that she wasn't looking at directly the photos that were being shown there in the courtroom. Where we left off with the direct examination was Dr. Gary Utz talking about the remains and the way that they were found and how they were located. And this is key because the defense is going to try to argue, we already know, that the meter reader, Roy Kronk, who found the remains, somehow had tampered with them. And in fact, they're alleging that he had possession of them and then took them there and dropped them off on December 11th, which correlated with the day that he had that meter reading route again. He hadn't had it since August 11th of 2008. And so the defense is going to try to allege that he had possession of them. Well, what the state is trying to do with this testimony that we're hearing now is they're talking about how deep the skull may have been in the ground. And they're talking about the plant and root growth that was apparently growing in, around, and on the skull and the bones and through the bag. And they were talking about the duct tape. And the implication that could be drawn from the duct tape is how weathered it was. Because the duct tape, while a lot of it wasn't attached to anything, the adhesiveness of the duct tape was gone. And so they're going to try to argue that this duct tape was out in the woods. It wasn't placed there by Roy Kronk. Roy Kronk didn't have possession of these remains because they wouldn't be as weathered as they were. That's certainly the argument that the defense is going to try to make. But Jackie, as we talk about the duct tape as well, what the defense is going to point out when they put on their case is that duct tape, it didn't have any fingerprints on it. It didn't have Kaylee's DNA on it. In fact, it had DNA on it that comes from someone they don't know who that DNA belonged to. And when you think about duct tape, I will leave you with this thought here really quick. If you were to wipe semi-wet soap on your fingers, and you were to take a piece of Scotch tape and try to remove a piece of Scotch tape from its ring. I did this the other day, and your fingerprints are on the tape. With that white, sticky, sudsy stuff from the soap, you would see your fingerprints on the tape. Now think about duct tape. It's more times adhesive than Scotch tape. You know, forensic examiners and crime scene analysts say that duct tape has a memory because all kinds of evidence sticks to it. Trace evidence, fingerprints. You can't fool duct tape. Duct tape has buried so many people in criminal court cases, and here we're seeing that there is really no correlation between the duct tape and Casey Anthony. There's no direct evidence tying the two together.